So my name is Father Charles Sikorsky. I'm the president at Divine Mercy University. And this afternoon, here at the National Eucharistic Congress, I'm blessed to be joined by Father Robert Spitzer, who is the founder and director of the Magis Center, among other things, is also very involved with the Napa Institute, and is a former president of Gonzaga University, where he built a great university, but also a great basketball program, by the way. I'm a basketball player.
Oh, great.
Congratulations on that.
Oh, thanks.
You made good hires.
Oh, yeah, we sure did.
But we would like to talk to Father today just about the whole question of faith and reason, faith and science. The core of our mission here at DMU, obviously, is to blend and integrate the anthropological vision of the person as gleaned from Catholic philosophy, theology, and psychology as a basis for our programs. But there's so many other facets of this question of faith and reason, and Father's been at the forefront, a leader within the church on this. And so just maybe you could just give us an overview of what you think the big challenge is today in faith and reason, and why we should all be concerned about this.
Well, first of all, despite the fact that more scientists today are theists, that is to say, believers in God or a high transcendent power, are, and even physicians are even more so, our young people have been inundated not only by social media, but also by their own high school preparation with the thought that, most scientists are atheists and that there is no evidence for God from science, and that science and faith are, in fact, in conflict. And so I've been trying to put together a whole series of resources to dispel that idea. I mean, the last Pew survey of scientists in the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences shows that 51% of scientists are believers in God, 21% are agnostic, and 20% are atheists. And then among young scientists who are 35 years of age or younger, they are 66%, a super majority, are believers in God and a higher transcendent power. Only 15% are atheists and 15% are agnostics. And then the doctors, the physicians, that's the most amazing of all. The last big survey of the Journal of Health and Religion did a real comprehensive survey and found that 76% of doctors believe in God. Only 12.5% are agnostics and 11.2% are atheists. So I don't get it. I mean, Dawkins comes on and starts a God delusion website, and, people treat this like it's, an absolutely validated truth. And in fact, Dawkins himself switched his position just a few years ago in a debate with Archbishop Williams in London. He says, "Well, I'm no longer an atheist. I'm an agnostic." And Sir Anthony Kenny, who was moderating the debate, says, "What? You're the head of the new atheism movement, and now you switched to agnosticism?" And he goes, "Yes, I did. My curiosity trumped my skepticism." And so we got to get the word out to our kids. I've written a lot of books, Science at the Doorstep to God and Christ, Science, and Reason, trying to get the scientific evidence out there so that kids will read this stuff. I've got, Sophia, Institute for Teachers. We have a program for seniors in high school and for middle schoolers, basically showing this information, because without it, they're left so unguarded when they get to college. But I think that's a big problem, is they're being inundated with half-truths and outright falsities, not just by high school teachers, though in the public schools that certainly is the case, and also they're being inundated with it, social media, etc. Like, how many websites have you read about Dawkins' conversion to agnosticism?
I have not. I've not heard that.
Yeah, because if you're not,
other than the Magis website,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it is encouraging. You mentioned younger scientists are actually more religious than the older side. That's a trend.
Yeah, and then that is a very good sign because, they really do see like the quantum problems that we have. I mean, how are you going to deal with the fact that we just can't, physicalism is dead. I mean, you're just not going to be able to, if you know anything about quantum physics whatsoever, you're never going to be able to justify the old atomistic systems, like clusters of mass points, that are coming together with chemical bonds or something. It's ridiculous. I mean, even Thomas Nagel says, well, I'm still going to call myself an atheist, but I must admit, there's a whole lot of problems with physicalist atheism. And he actually wrote a book called, Mind and Cosmos, why the neo-Darwinian materialistic view of evolution is almost certainly wrong. Now, if an atheist is doing this, that there's something's going on. Plus, I think near-death experience studies, when you've got basically in the New York Academy of Sciences in 2022 declaring on the basis of those peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences and terminal lucidity, that there's a very credible chance that your consciousness will survive bodily death. That's the New York Academy of Sciences.
That's a fascinating. I was going to ask you, I know you've spoken and written about that.
Yeah.
These near-death experiences. But what we do, our approach to psychology is say, well, we have body, mind, and soul, right? We can distinguish those things, but we're one whole. And it's like this research that was showing these near-death experiences, really, it's evidence that there is a soul. There's evidence, you say consciousness and so forth.
Yeah, well,
can you talk a little bit more of some of those studies?
Sure. Basically, scientists have been able to show that when a person hits what we call clinical death, so maybe the person had a heart attack, and about 22 seconds after the heart attack, all the oxygen has been deprived, the brain has been deprived of oxygen. Once that happens, a state is called clinical death occurs, flat EEG, which means there's no electrical activity in the cerebral or frontal cortices, and just little sputterings of neurons in the lower brain, but it's so little electrical activity that you have no gag reflex, fixed and dilated pupils, so even involuntary systems are not working. So the electrical activity in the lower brain is minimal. There's nothing in the higher brain functions. Well, that means you can't see, you can't hear, you can't think, you can't remember, you can't have emotions, you're never going to have self-reflective consciousness, etc. And in addition to that, you're certainly not going to have a sense of yourself existing, etc. Well, we know, and literally thousands of cases that are now presented in peer-reviewed medical journals have people leave their body.
Thousands of cases.
Yeah.
This isn't just not just a couple of instances of this.
And that's right, thousands of them. And in addition to that, when they leave their body, they can see, they can hear, and they can move right through walls. They can defy gravity. They can do amazing things. And so when you really look at it, they can report data. So, one lady goes through the third floor of the hospital, goes to the outside, and is looking down at the ledge and can see a tennis shoe there, probably dropped by a construction worker, with a worn left toe and a shoe lace stuck under the heel, sitting there on the ledge of the third floor outside the hospital, quite invisible to people from the outside. So, of course, she goes out there and she's hovering up there and looking down at that shoe. And one of the independent researchers after the fact, Kimberly Clark, I believe was her name, actually comes outside the hospital and finds the tennis shoe there exactly as described. I mean, who knew? And the same thing, Mr. So-and-so, we lost your dentures. Oh, no, you didn't. The nurse with the red hair pulled them out of my mouth just before you guys put the paddles on me, opened a drawer under a machine which looks like this, and threw them in there and slammed it. So if you find that nurse with the red hair, open up that drawer, you're going to see my denture. And of course, there they are.
With the dentures.
Oh, yeah, they're right there. And of course, like, we also know 81% of blind people, most of whom were blind from birth, see for the first time when they're clinically dead. 81%.
Wow, and these are verified and
verified. So like this 16-year-old Bradley Burroughs, right? He just goes right through the hospital walls. And he's literally hovering up near the roof of the hospital outside, and he's looking at the scene below. Of course, he doesn't know. He knows that snow is white, so he can see, he knows what whiteness is for the first time. But he's describing this. He says, well, there was snow out there, and grooved into that snow were tram tracks. And then sure enough, while I was out there, a tram passed by with a big, huge sign on the back of the tram with an arrow pointing to the right. And sure enough, the tram went into a grove of trees off to the right, and he describes the entire scene. So we know, what do trams have? They have schedules. What do heart attacks in hospitals have? They have schedules. You can match the timing 100% perfectly. When he was having his heart attack, Bradley was, the tram was actually passing by with the big sign on it, with the arrow pointing to the right, and moving toward that grove of trees. So,
So these are all in peer-reviewed academic journals.
That's correct.
And I guess it sounds like something that should be on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Man comes back from the dead, born blind, and now is seeing all these different things.
Well, secular media certainly keeps it hidden. Some papers like the New York Post will publish things, but the New York Academy of Sciences is very reputable. Like the Pim von Lommel study, which is excellent, was published in The Lancet, which is Britain's #1 medical journal. And then, the big AWARE study done by Dr. Samuel Parney and his team, a big team of folks, 2,060 patients, etc. These things are really, they show a very large percentage of cases where people are reporting veridical data. That is to say, data which is accurate, 100% verified by independent researchers after the fact. And there's just no way. How can you say that somebody goes right through the walls of the waiting room, into the waiting room from the operating room, and he goes in there and he hears everybody talking about him, and he says, that guy was wearing this, and that other guy, my brother, was wearing my T-shirt, and they were making fun of me or something like that, and reports the whole conversation word for word. It's, he's there, and he's not in the operating room. He's not even in any, really remote proximity to his body.
And all this, you can find this on the Magis Institute website. Stories on that. Is that magisinstitute.com?
Magiscenter.com. I'm sorry. Magiscenter.com.
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 Okay.
And you can get that all free of charge. There's a whole chapter on in my new book, Science at the Doorstep to God, which is, fairly extended. That goes through the studies and so forth. And I cover it in many of my other books as well.
Fascinating, yeah. So at Divine Mercy University, there's a mental health crisis in the country and the world. It seems to be getting worse and worse by the day. And the solutions of the secular field of psychology really doesn't, it's a very reductionist view of the human person. But what we've been trying to do, and for the last 25 years now, is the backbone of our programs is a Catholic Christian traditional anthropology, right? You have any thoughts on those who are studying what you might say to them and encourage them in their work? You see a need for that?
No. Well, first of all, the reductionist view of the human person, that is to say, without a soul, first of all, it's wrong because we've got so much evidence, not just from near-death experience studies, but from terminal lucidity studies, even the intelligence of hydrocephalic patients. I mean, it's overwhelming evidence. You have a transphysical soul, and there's a strong possibility that your consciousness will not only survive your bodily death, but that you will see either one of two scenarios when you leave your body. Either you will go to a heavenly domain with a very loving white light that many people identify as Jesus Christ, or you could go to a dark domain. That happens in 20% of the people in the studies. 80% experience this white light, and a lot of adults don't remember it. Children have a much higher percentage of going to heavens, the heavenly place. But the main thing also to notice is that, the American Psychiatric Association did a big study, Kanita Dervitt did, in 2004, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. And in it, she shows that non-religiously affiliated people, by comparison with the religiously affiliated people, so non-religiously affiliated would be like what the Pew survey calls a none, N-O-N-E.
Sure.
And that it basically means what do they show in the comparison? They have significantly higher rates, sometimes over double the rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, familial tensions, antisocial aggressivity, suicidal contemplation, and suicides. Hey, they're not happy people. 6 studies since that time, 2 of which were done by a very fine professor at Duke University, Harold Koenig at Duke, and his team show the very same results. Not only that, religiously oriented people are not just happier with significantly lower rates of depression, anxiety, and suicides, etc., but in addition to that, they heal faster. Their healings in the hospital, physical healings, are more long-lasting. And for sure, with religion combined with therapy, that leads by far to the highest success results of moving out of, for example, severe depression. And we got to stop the reductionism.
Yep.
It's really killing us right now, and it's killing us in ways that we're not allowing our patients the fullness of both a spiritual and combined with therapeutic solution that Koenig is talking about. And I think he's got some really good studies to back that up. But the main thing that I would also want to add in the same breath is that you look at what's happening with our young people right now. We know that major depressive disorder in just 10 years, yes, COVID accelerated it a little bit, but even the previous 10 years, we almost doubled it among the age group from 15 to 25. And especially in the last 10 years, major depressive disorder went up from 8% to 16% among that group of young people. Now, that's really bad if 16% of your young people have major depressive disorder. That's like ongoing clinical depression, right? 16%.
And that's a severe thing. I mean, it's not just feeling the blues a bit. It's, and you probably saw that, working on a college campus. So
absolutely. It's been ongoing. Religion is the solution. If you, first of all, religious people just have a much lower incidence of just what I would call, not just momentary depression, but also what I would call continuous, though maybe not clinical depression and anxiety, but they also have much lower levels of suicides and suicidal contemplation. And that those 6 studies, I just have a new book out called The 4 Levels of Happiness. And I do present those 6 studies in there because religion is absolutely integral to the happiness question. And but you're right, the reductionism is killing us. And right now, our kids are so into ego-comparative happiness and so not into religion. And if they just turn that around, they would basically not only lower the rates of depression, anxiety, But what's most troubling of all, the suicides, and now the 34% increase in homicides among that age group. This is not it's not a happy age group.
Well, it's absolutely starts religion, and then of course that impacts the family situation, which exacerbates all of this. And then
You're right.
then all these other things do contribute. But that is the root, right? If once you get right with God, then the families are going to be stronger. You're going to have hope. You're going to have, no matter how difficult things get, and it's just a spiral. And the virtual world is very deceptive. It's people looking for connection. I think this week we're here celebrating the Holy Eucharist, the real presence. I mean, you couldn't get the best kind of connection we can have is with God and with the mystical body of Christ.
Oh yeah.
And people are craving, young people especially, they're lonely, they desire connection, and they're feeding themselves on virtual connections that are superficial and just aren't satisfying.
Oh yeah.
And they're starting off from a bad place anyway with the lack of faith in their family.
Oh yeah.
It's there's a lot to.
Yeah, no, relative to your point. Oh yeah, that last point you made about the family, the number one factor for happy and long-lasting marriages is religion. There's only one thing that's almost tied with it, and that's the initial commitment to staying with one person exclusively on a permanent basis. Now, that commitment and religion, you combine those two things, a happy marriage, or more satisfying marriage, more long-lasting marriage, less divorce, by a huge factor. You take religion out of the equation, the divorce rate just doubles. So you are correct in that, for sure. And also the strength of the Holy Eucharist. I mean, my mom was a daily communicant, and I learned about the preciousness of the Eucharist from her. But I have to tell you, in my own life, I would not be a priest today were it not for my starting to go to daily mass, quite haphazardly, I might add. Even though my mom went, I didn't have any intention of doing it. And one day, kid came up to me, Bert Martinez, and he says, "Hey, what are you going to do for Lent?" And I said, "I don't know, I'll give up meat or something." He goes, "I'm going to go to mass every day." So then, well, Martinez can do that. I can do that. So I started going to mass every day. And sure enough, I got hooked. And Lent was over, Easter came, and I kept going to mass. I was not going to tear myself away. 4 years later, I mean, I turned around on a dime. I wanted money and I wanted power. I was going to major in business and so forth to try and, get a whole lot of money. And what do I wind up doing? Just studying philosophy and then joining the Jesuits. So anyway.
Okay. That is turning on a dime.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was worth it. And that's what I think. I think my vocation is similar, right? It was when I discovered the Eucharist and started going to Mass more frequently. All of a sudden, it's just like, oh, now I know how this is fellowship. Christ walks with us. He gives us the grace and the strength we need to be able to really make that radical change in our lives. So you have this is a new version of your book, The Four Levels of Happiness, has come out. I know you've written on that before, but
I just
brand new one. Okay.
Yeah, Sophia published it a little while back. But what I did with this one is I put a lot more science into chapter 12 because some of our kids just need the near-death experiences. They need to know about the new physical evidence. Stephen Hawking, very important physicist that a lot of kids know about, kind of reversed his position. I debated him in the Larry King Show in 2010, but by 2018, he turned around on a dime and published his last article was in Journal of High Energy Physics, where he basically pretty much single-handedly with his partner Thomas Hertog disproved the possibility of what's called a fractal multiverse, which allowed for an infinite multiverse and eternal inflation. And once that happened, all of a sudden, Hawking himself came in and said, well, there's going to have to be a beginning. If there is a multiverse, it will have to be very limited in bubble universes. And boy, oh boy, does that make the religious argument look really, really valid. So, I mean, I have to tell you, I put that into chapter 12 because I think the kids need to hear it.
Yeah.
I think they need to know, get a little bit more. The transcendentals are not explained well in so many of our schools. So I put in chapters 10 and 11 a lot of info on the transcendentals and there things they could understand and relate to. So I'm trying to get them up to the 4th level. But at the end, I tried to say it's not enough to believe. You can say, well, no, thank you, Spitzer. I read your book, and now I think it's reasonable and responsible to believe in God. You can't put the period there. You have to go to a faith community. You have to practice. You have to start a prayer life. You have to start, and you're going to need Jesus. You're going to need Christ. You're going to need some revelation to follow. You just can't,
Absolutely.
Be detached, from who God is in his heart. And you're not going to find that in a proof. Science can tell you that there is an intelligent creator out there. Science can tell you that there is a strong likelihood of a life after death, and even tell you maybe 80% will have a good experience and 20% will not among adults, but it may be a much lower percentage than that because only among children who have undergo clinical death, right? About 60% of them will have a near-death experience. With adults, only 20%. So we don't know about the other 80%.
Okay.
So that 80-20 ratio may be wrong, but right now, children have a much higher percentage.
You got to be careful about that, right? Some people might think the odds are so good they don't.
They don't have to do it.
They're okay, right?
Yeah.
Well,
But they may not remember something that's unpleasant, and that's why the percentage may be so much lower with adults.
And so,
children.
Yeah. Well, I like so your book it touches on it's philosophical, but it's also empirical.
Very empirical.
What we're trying to do too with our students, we have to be good people of faith, actually people of God. We have to be well trained in techniques, but we also have to do good research. We have this as good Christians and Catholics. We won't convince many people if we don't really have that science, that empirical science to back us up. Especially in the social sciences today, in psychology, there's a great need for, it's almost like it's a pseudoscience that's developing in some ways where, some of the current issues out there on sexuality and so forth, seems like, they're not even seriously considering evidence. And so we need to come up with studies and really take that seriously if we're going to be who God's calling us to be.
Oh, you are so right again. I just wrote another book called The Moral Wisdom of the Catholic Church. So I'm doing this research from the archives of general psychiatry on what happens with transgenderism. So in other words, what happens when you start the gender-affirming therapy and what happens when you start, get a sexual reassignment surgery, right? Mm-hmm. When you start looking at the evidence, if you start just getting hormones of the opposite sex of your biological sex, if you start getting those hormones, your mortality rate goes up by 3 times. Mm-hmm. That is in a 50-year Den Haag Dutch study, which, they tried to bring that down as over 50 years, and they were not able to bring it down. And so you look at that and you go, now, why would you want to do that? Then you look at those who got the sexual reassignment surgery. And now the New York Times comes out with all these polls which say, after 1 year, these people were so happy. After 2 years, they're still really happy with their sexual reassignment surgery. You got to wait until the 5th year. Then you see that the rate of happiness drops precipitously. Then by the 10th year, what you see is that the suicide rates go up enormously because the anxiety is not produced by gender dissociation and gender dysphoria. What it is brought about by people who have been abused in 60% of cases. sexually and physically, by people who have a super anxiety in their households. And the boy blames himself for not being a girl, and the girl blames herself for not being a boy, and that's why the anxiety's there in the household. And then, of course, there's, latent homosexual desire as well. So all of these things, you start putting the real causes together, and you can bet your bottom dollar by about the 7th year after a sexual reassignment surgery, all those anxieties which have never been treated will now begin to resurge. And of course, the aura, the placebo of, I'm going to get this surgery and my problems, my anxieties are going to be done with. Now it's the opposite. 7 years after, when the anxieties return, because they were never therapeutically treated, then what winds up happening? Not only do the anxieties come back, but now there's buyer's remorse. And now, they know they have done a destructive thing to themselves, and they cannot reverse it. And then when their anxieties are exacerbated rather than diminished, then the next thing that happens is they start committing suicides. And the rate after between 10 to 20 years after the sexual reassignment surgery, according to a 30-year Swedish survey, the suicide rate went up 20 times. That's 2,000%. I mean,
2,000%.
Yeah. I mean, wow. 20 times. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Just
unleashes so many problems. So,
Finland, Great Britain, Sweden, Norway, they've all turned their policies around. They will not, you cannot offer gender affirming therapy anymore in those countries which were forerunners to it. Now the U.S. is championing it like there was nobody's business.
Yeah.
And we've even got the politicians championing it. Yet all the data, again and again, in Swedish surveys, Dutch surveys, etc., where this has really been scientifically studied for a long, long time, all of it is saying, you're crazy. This thing is bad. But you were saying they're not looking at data. They're not looking.
They don't want to see the. Yes.
They don't want to see the data.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Father Spitzer, you've been more than generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And Magis Institute, check it out. It's got so many great Magis Center, I think, is at the website.
MagisCenter.com.
Med.com. And thank you so much. And I know you've been a speaker before with us at DNU.
You bet.
We're grateful for that. And just I know you're in such demand here. So thanks a lot. And God bless you in all your work.
God bless you too, Father. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Father.